I only read one book, but it's a good book, don't you know? I act the way I act because the good book tells me so. If I want to know how to be good, it's to the good book that I go. Because the good book is a book, and it is good, and it's a book.
And Joseph did find himself thrown into jail, after the sex-pest wife of his master had tried to rape him, and did tell as to her husband that things did actually happen the other way around. So his master did throw him in jail, and it came to pass, after these things, that the butler of the king of Egypt and his baker had offended their lord, the king of Egypt. And Pharaoh was wroth against the two of his officers, against the chief of the butlers, and against the chief of the bakers. For he did find that his meat pie was not entirely cooked in the middle, and though the obvious conclusion would be that this would be the baker's fault, the chief of the butlers did get locked up, because everyone doth know that the butler did it. And he put them in ward in the house of the captain of the guard, into the prison, the place where Joseph was bound, and they did look upon Joseph, constrained by leather straps and wearing a gimp mask, and suddenly they did realize that they were indeed in a lot of trouble. And the captain of the guard charged Joseph with them, as some time had gone by since the previous chapter, and the captain of the guard had made Joseph a trustee, mainly because he was indeed a most extraordinary arse-licker, and he served them, and they continued a season in ward. And because they had eaten cheese before they did rest for the night, they dreamed a dream, both of them, each man his dream in one night, each man according to the interpretation of his dream, the butler and the baker, yet not the candlestick maker of the king of Egypt, which were bound in the prison, and the dream did involve them furiously tapping the heels of their sandals together, and repeatedly saying, "There's no place like home." And in many centuries to come, a man who would come to read this narrative in an interesting and humorous way would look upon the words that will follow in this verse, and without changing the words used in the original scripture found in the exceptionally accurate King James Version of this narrative in any way, shall say, Joseph came in unto them in the morning, and looked upon them, and behold, they were sad. Which was unsurprising, as being rudely awoken early in the morning by someone smashing thy back gates in doth tend to start the day off completely wrong. And he asked Pharaoh's officers that were with him in the ward of his lord's house, saying, Wherefore look ye so sadly today? And they did reply that this was because he had just anely raped them, and that no amount of comforting shall make up for the fact that whence thou doth forcibly get thine horizons broadened and thy starfish stretched, unless thou art into that sort of thing, thy happy face shall thou be wearing not. And they said unto him, We have dreamed a dream, and there is no interpreter of it. And Joseph said unto them, Do not interpretations belong to God? Tell me them, I pray you, for by an amazing coincidence thou art talking to an expert. Were they the type of dream that did involve trains going into tunnels and gardeners pushing wheelbarrows full of manure up steep hills? And the chief butler told his dream to Joseph, and said to him, In my dream, behold, a vine was before me. And Joseph did ask him if he did grasp it with both hands, and work thine way up unto the root from the tip. And the butler did ask him if he could try and interpret the dream without constant references to homoerotic imagery. And Joseph did remind him that he was not the one that was having the dream. And the butler continued, And in the vine there were 3 branches, and it was as though it budded, and her blossom shot forth. And Joseph and all the other men there present did eye him with suspicion, but he continued, And the clusters therefore brought forth ripe grapes. And Pharaoh's cup was in mine hand, and I took the grapes, and pressed them into Pharaoh's cup, and I gave the cup unto Pharaoh's hand, and it was as if there were 2 guys, and 1 cup, which would be a variation upon a theme, the sight of which in many years hence would bring to a person's face the look of shock and disgust that was presently upon Joseph's. And when he did banish from his mind the vision of 2 men eating a chocolate pudding, Joseph said unto him, This is the interpretation of it. And all who did listen did embrace themselves, for they did have visions of the butler's hemorrhoids being thrust thus into the Pharaoh's novelty coffee mug, with the words "The Boss" written upon its side also. The 3 branches are 3 days, which, coincidentally, would be when the Pharaoh's birthday would be. Yet within 3 days shall Pharaoh lift up thine head, and restore thee unto thy place, and thou shalt deliver Pharaoh's cup into his hand, from the silver platter on which thou doth serve afternoon tea, whilst dressed in thine best suit, and talking in a rather droll and condescending British accent, with thine left eyebrow raised, after the former manner when thou wast his butler, and in a way similar to a man who shall in many years from now come to read this in an interesting and humorous manner. And in a way that it shall always be when someone doth get talking to a man who doth work closely with, or is on bestest terms with someone who is famous or influential. Joseph did say thus: "But think on me when it shall be well with thee, and show kindness, I pray thee, unto me, and make mention of me unto Pharaoh, and bring me out of this house. For indeed I was stolen away out of the land of the Hebrews, which up to now has been exclusively known as either the land where my father and his relatives were strangers, the land of the Canaanites, or even that land that is promised us, but certainly not the land that is ours. And here also have I done nothing that they should put me into the dungeon. For, like all prisoners, I am entirely innocent, and didth do it not, gov, for it was truly a fit-up job, and mine presence here is indeed a travesty of justice, and make no mistake." And Joseph did take this moment to contemplate just how much worse his life would be if the Lord was not indeed with him, watching over him and protecting him, and that he should indeed be thankful for only being thrown down a well by his own family, who wanted him dead, then sold into slavery by a band of travelling Arabs, then being sexually harassed and molested by his master's wife, who then accused him of rape before he was thrown into prison for a crime that he didn't commit. And when the chief baker saw that the interpretation was good, he did think that just because the butler's dream was a foreboding of glad tidings, his dream would be also. And he said unto Joseph, "I also was in my dream, and behold, I had 3 white baskets on my head." And Joseph did look unto him, and ask him if he was indeed a Zen monk who did play the flute. And the baker did think for a minute, and then did say, "No, I'm a baker. They were bread baskets." And he did continue. "And the uppermost basket there was of all manner of bake meats for Pharaoh, for the Pharaoh does like his pies. And the birds did eat them out of the basket upon mine head, which admittedly probably could have been avoided had I covered them with a cloth." And Joseph, who could indeed tell the future in a most uncannily accurate way, given that he did get his information directly from God, who did know everything, and who was apparently with him, answered and said, "This is the interpretation thereof. The 3 baskets are 3 days. And the baker did say that he could have probably guessed that, given that Pharaoh's birthday was in 3 days, and that he doth usually sort out the prisoner sentencing on that day also." But Joseph continued, "Yet within 3 days shall Pharaoh lift up thy head off thee, and shall hang thee on a tree. And the birds shall eat thy flesh from off thee." And unsurprisingly, the baker was not at all satisfied with this interpretation, and did ask Joseph why it was that the butler got to go free, yet he was to be decapitated and hung out in a tree to be eaten by birds. And Joseph did say unto him, "Don't blame me, it's your bloody dream." And it came to pass the 3rd day, which was Pharaoh's birthday, that he made a feast unto all his servants. And he lifted up the head of the chief butler and of the chief baker among his servants, because it was apparently customary for him to throw a party for his staff, even the ones he did throw in jail from time to time. And just as Joseph had predicted, in his uncannily accurate interpretation of the butler's dream, he restored the chief butler unto his butlership again. and he gave the cup into Pharaoh's hand, along with a small plate that did hold a number of chocolate digestives and a Kit Kat, and the Pharaoh did take a sip of the warm sweet milky tea, and did surely exclaim, by Eclad, there's no like a cup of Yorkshire tea. And the butler did say unto him, Aye. But because his shop was some distance from the Pharaoh's palace, and the Pharaoh did think that it was, indeed, a bloody long way to go for a loaf of bread, especially when the baker's bread did not have the word Hovis written upon its sides, he hanged the chief baker, as Joseph had interpreted to them, but obviously with a few minor changes in the details, such as that he did not behead him and leave his body in a tree for his flesh to be eaten by the birds, but did just simply hang him instead. Yet did not the chief butler remember Joseph, but forgot him, which did indeed finish this chapter on an anticlimactic cliffhanger. And though the cliffhanger was indeed anticlimactic, it was entirely the kind of cliffhanger that did leave the story open for an obligatory sequel that would no doubt be imaginatively titled Genesis 41. Or spin-off series about Joseph's time as a prisoner, which would expand on the details, so that we would find that he was indeed trapped in a strange holiday resort in North Wales, and that everyone would be known by a number rather than their name. And one known only as Number 2 would act upon the orders of an unseen and unknown Number 1, and try to extract information from Joseph, who would be referred to as Number 6, by subjecting him to surreal situations and experiences, and late at night, Joseph would wake from a recurring nightmare that would involve him being chased across an empty beach by a large white balloon and shout, I'm not a number, I'm a free man.